There we go. Okay, sorry about that. Technical difficulties. So now that we're recording, our agenda, we're going to start with a short video that you may have already seen featuring Dennis Tamura of Blue Heron Farms and Danny Karp, one of our speakers today. And we released the video in December of 2020. And so while we can't obviously be on the farm together, the video does provide a really nice overview of the farm with beautiful images to help us visualize, if you haven't been there, what it's like to be there. And then we're going to hear from Joanne and Dennis. They're going to have a conversation about the farm and their practices to support beneficial birds. And then our next speaker is Danny Karp, and he is an assistant professor in the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Conservation Biology at UC Davis. And he's going to cover how the presence of habitat beneficially affects birds' impacts in strawberries and other crops. And then next is Matt Johnson, who is professor of wildlife at Humboldt State University. And in his presentation, he's going to describe barn owl prey, hunting behavior, habitat influences, and the best types and locations of nest boxes. Then Eric Brennan, a research horticulturalist with the USDA. He's going to discuss how not all sparrows are the same, and will suggest ways that farmers might use cover crops to reduce sparrow damage on coal crops, while also encouraging sparrows to feed on weeds. And then we'll wrap up with Melanie Truen, who is a staff research associate at the Museum of Wildlife and Fish Biology at UC Davis. And she will describe nest box plans, installation, monitoring techniques, and reproductive outcomes with examples from the Puda Creek Nest Box Highway and the Davis Nest Box Network. So then we'll have a Q&A session and the evaluation that I hope you will stick around for. And that is, we'll wrap up our day at that point. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play this very short video. It's only 4 minutes long. So sit back and enjoy.
Here we are doing the highly manipulated form of agriculture in this environment of wildlands. It's kind of a neat combination. You know, we're kind of like a market garden. We have 18.5 acres, veggies, flowers. During those whole 80s period, the whole IPM movement started up, expanded the whole idea about pest control or the health of the farm environment.
We're now trying to understand the role of birds on farms and whether they're eating the crops or eating the beneficial insects or eating the pest insects and providing us with benefits. When you have diversity in the farm or when you are embedded in landscapes that have more diversity surrounding it, you tend to have more of these beneficial birds.
Tree swallows, the violet greens, and bluebirds, they're out here all the time. And over the years, they've made this a place to come to. Well, I don't know how many years ago. It's been quite a while. Started off with 7 boxes. I decided to make a few more. So I think we had about 20 at that point. After that, I made a few more. So I don't know how many we had, like 32 or something like that.
2 of the most common species that we see using nest boxes in California are tree swallows in general, and then also the western bluebirds. And they forage through very different ways. When you have different species on farms doing different ways of going about eating their food, then you end up getting more benefits because they're eating different things. For the swallows, they eat food on the wing. They're aerial insectivores.
They are definitely out there eating because every night you can see them going, swooping around. And they're feeding their, this year, whatever, 70 offspring.
On the other hand, we have birds like western bluebirds, which we would call more gleaners. They would be birds that would be going around and picking out insects and eating them.
Our main pests in the summer are flea beetles. The tree swallows are definitely eating the flea beetles. When they're here, they're very active, swooping over plants that are victims of the flea beetles. the numbers do go down when the swallows are present, for sure, and they definitely go up when they leave.
There are a variety of ways that you can boost up bird diversity on your farm and then realize some of these pest control benefits that birds might be providing. You could put up perches for raptors to come on, or you could put up nest boxes.
You know, kind of neat to watch the whole fledgling process, and the parents coming along, feeding them, diving into the hole, and the young ones sticking their head out, which is always fun to watch.
So you could plant vegetation in the form of hedgerows or flower strips. It could be having cover crops. If you have natural remnant vegetation either embedded within your farm or most often kind of surrounding it, maintaining that and conserving that is absolutely critical. Farmers are very concerned that birds could be bringing foodborne diseases like E. coli and Salmonella onto the farm field. And while those pathogens are found in birds, they're very rare. And the species that actually tend to carry those pathogens more are more common on farms that have less habitat around them. They might have foodborne diseases occasionally. They might eat beneficial insects or more likely eat crops that you are concerned about. We want to look at the net impact of the bird on the farm. Actions that increase the diversity on the farm field by planting hedgerows, by maintaining habitat around farm fields, tend to make that net impact be more of a net benefit rather than a net cost.
The whole thing about being observant, I mean, really observant, I think it's a valuable lesson. It's another small connection to something bigger. I mean, like in Buddhist tradition, it's to do real work. It's a bigger context in which to look at things. Yeah, put up the boxes. Doesn't hurt.
All right. So now I'm going to hand it over to Joanne and Dennis, and they're going to take it from here.
Thanks, Shelley. Hi, I'm Joanne Baumgartner with Wild Farm Alliance, and Dennis and I are going to talk about what his farm is like and how he's supporting these birds. And while you saw some of that, we're going to delve into it a bit more. And it's just such a delight to be at Blue Heron Farm, especially when the swallows and bluebirds and barn owls are using their nest boxes, not just because they're beautiful and give us respite in the fast-paced world, but also because there's this reciprocal relationship going on. The farm provides boxes and the birds provide pest control. So Dennis, can you describe your farm, where it's situated in the world and what kinds of landscapes and habitats surround it?
Well, sure. Have a somewhat of an idea by virtue of that previous video, which covered a lot of stuff that I was going to actually talk about. But anyway, we have been down here probably 35 years now. Corralitos, if you look at that map, is just on the northern edge of Watsonville, about 15 miles south of Santa Cruz, and probably 3 miles or so from the ocean, which of course is the major factor in the climate, the wonderful climate that we have here. So, like the video said, we have about 18.5 acres surrounded by a lot of natural habitat. And it's kind of a little valley, so that in the summer, or practically every day, it's a little bit of a cold pocket. And usually in the summer, we range from about 75 degrees, 65 degrees in there. And then of course we have spikes up into the 90s and 100s, but they don't last very long. So it's an ideal climate for a lot of things to grow, because it's a long season to begin with. So as far as our farm, you can see from the pictures, our main emphasis is pretty much cool weather crops. And it kind of goes along with also over the years, we've figured out that for our marketing and business plans, we're focused on those things, as well as our major, I guess, venue for sales is farmers markets. So during the summer, we usually do around 6 per week, and a certain amount of wholesale sales. Well, not so much restaurants last year, but stores, and there are a few new online farmers markets that have started up because of COVID restrictions. So in general, like I guess we talked about before, is that it's kind of like a market garden in the respect that there's a lot of diversity, a lot of vegetables and cut flowers, and we've been doing it for a long time. So it's good in the sense that we've been in the farmers markets that we're in for quite a while. So those of you who do farmers markets know that people are very loyal usually. So makes things fairly straightforward in terms of being able to plan for the season. Although, if there's such a thing as a normal season, that's what we're hoping for.
Yeah, so you have 33 nest boxes, 17 last year were used by swallows, 4 by bluebirds, and 1 by barn owls. And in the video, you told us about how the swallows are helping reduce flea beetles. But what do you do for flea beetles before the swallows arrive and after they leave?
Well, usually the flea beetle population is a lot lower in, say, from January to March, when the swallows actually start to arrive. They sort of increase when it gets a little bit warmer. And also just some of the crops that they really prefer, flea beetles that is, we don't eat at the plant until probably March or April. So it's just, it just builds up, because the biological activity builds up everywhere. Not only insects, but the birds can hear, and the plants are growing, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it took a while for us to just realize that the swallows were doing such an important job here. And of course, the other side of it is you notice it a lot when they leave, because it seems like the flea beetles are very much more active, and we counter that trying to do a certain amount of renay for protection, but that has its consequences when it gets hot. And if it gets really out of hand and we need the crops, then there's basically a organic, which is a biological insecticide. So, but we don't do it that often. So usually things kind of get through it, or the crops are fast growing enough so that we can harvest them.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because, it's interesting that you had said you really have to pay attention, and it took you a while to actually notice what was going on, but then you were happy with that. And I know you were also interested in the bluebirds that are there, and because bluebirds are known to be consuming plant-eating insects like beetles and aphids and fly larvae and caterpillar, and the bluebirds are there year-round. And so have you been able to figure out what they might be doing as far as helping with pest control, or do you have any theories on that?
Well, bluebirds are funny because like in the winter, every now and then, after not seeing them for a couple weeks, there's like a bunch of them. They look like they're just playing around, actually. And I'm sure there's hunting around for food and things like that. But they're kind of here sort of erratically, while during the time that the swallows are here, between March and July, the bluebirds are much more present. And a lot of times you could see them when we're doing work on the tractor, mowing crops or whatever, they're following right behind, eating insects that are disturbed, and things like that. So, you know, you can tell that they're always on the lookout for food, which of course natural. So yeah, they're fun animals. I think the swallows kind of bully them though, so they push them out of some of the pots. But otherwise,
And
they're here.
I'm
have
sorry,
you ever
Dennis.
had any? Oh, go ahead, Shelley.
I was going to say, Dennis, can you speak up a little bit? Some folks are having a hard time hearing you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
The microphone's right there. Also, tell them we're not seeing your picture.
Oh, our picture's not there?
Oh,
Nope.
we can see Dennis.
We
Oh,
just see
okay.
Joanne.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Let's see. Well, so have you ever noticed that the bluebirds or tree swallows cause any problems?
No, never that I've noticed.
Yeah.
Funny, well, years ago, we have a big barn here, and years ago, the barn swallows used to hang out in there and build their nests, etc. And they were irritating our guys because they used to put all their clothes underneath them, and the swallows, of course, pooped on them. So we had to do something about that. But they moved on to other barns. But the outside swallows, nope, you know, it's never been an issue, and they're pretty darn tame because, as you see in those boxes, they're right along an access road that we use all the time when we're out in the field. So they just go about their business. They're flying, you know, dodging the truck and whatever. And, you know, I ride my bike up and down the road there, and I'm within 5 feet of them. They don't pay any attention to me. It's like, it's okay.
And then the barn you're in right now has a barn owl box with and it's occupied with barn owls, right?
I think so. I mean,
I
you
mean,
can never quite tell until I mean, if you look down on the ground and you see the remains of their regurgitation or whatever, that's usually the sign. And until they have their young, where you can hear them, or if I get up on a ladder and I can look inside the hole there, because it's up quite a ways. But yeah, I don't think we've not had a group of owls for the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. It's a good spot for them anyway in our barn here, because nothing's around here.
yeah, I remember when we were in there the other day, we saw some really fresh pellets with bones and other fur. Yeah, and then what about sparrows? I think you said that you might have problems with sparrows, and you have in the past, but maybe not so much now. Or could you talk about that? What kinds of problems you might have had?
Well, you know, the sparrows come and go. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm sure Eric would probably be able to identify, but they're not here all the time. And when they do come, they tend to cause a bunch of problems with some of the crops. And right now, I noticed there's a few around. A couple of weeks ago, there was hardly any around. So I don't know what their cycle is in particular in this particular area. And they also have their preferred food items, you know, where they'll damage it to the point where you can't sell it, for instance. But, you know, a lot of this overwintering stuff, it's not so important for us. But they can do quite a bit of damage in certain areas, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, it's going to be interesting to hear Eric Brennan talk more about sparrows.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's all the questions I had for you. Did we cover everything? Is there anything else you want to share with the folks? And of course, they may have questions afterwards.
Well, you know, it's probably, like I said in the video, it took a while actually to even, as they say, see what I was looking at all these years with the sparrows and birds and wildlife in general. And because, you know, you're here, you're working, and you don't really think that, okay, this is a specifically different situation than a lot of people have in terms of their farming or whatever. So, you know, you just learn to observe and appreciate things a little bit more, which is always fun. And yeah, I'm going to be very interested to hear what all these other people are going to say. Because yeah, it's always better to have whatever more expanded view of the farm or a farm. So thanks. Thank you for having.
Yeah, well, thank you, Dennis, for being open to hosting us on your farm in person, but then now virtually. And yeah, as I said, it's always wonderful when I get to visit there. So I hope everybody enjoyed hearing from Dennis and the slideshow. And now, Shelley, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Great. Okay, and I'm gonna just hand it right back over to Danny Karp. I'm gonna stop sharing and let him share his screen now.
Cool. Thanks so much, Joanne and Shelley, for organizing this event. It's a real pleasure to be here and to speak with you guys today about the work that we've been doing in the Central Coast for the last few years on strawberry farms, primarily. Before I go any further, I want to acknowledge that this is a really big team effort. It's definitely not just me out there. We've got a big crew of people from, in addition to UC Davis, from Berkeley, from Riverside, from Washington State University, from University of Kentucky, from the University of British Columbia. Lots of people have been working on this project together. And in particular, I really want to highlight Alyssa Olympi, who was a postdoc with me, and Karina Garcia, who is a grad student with David Gonthier. Both of them have done a ton of this work, and really it wouldn't be happening without them. So kind of starting off at a broad view, I'm a conservation biologist. That's sort of my background. So why would I, as a conservation biologist, work in agricultural systems? Why would I come to study agriculture? Well, for a very long time, conservation biologists focused all of our efforts on just setting up ecological reserves, national parks, protected areas. And we thought that was, really the best way out there to conserve wildlife. And over time, the amount of protected areas has grown on Earth to be now around 15% of Earth's surface. And it's a pretty good number. But that number sort of pales in comparison to the amount of Earth's surface that's covered with farms and pastures, which sits somewhere around 40% of the land on Earth, depending on how you measure it. So back in the early 2000s, late 1990s, a group of scientists started getting together and asking, is there anything we could do to sort of better co-manage these farms and pastures, but both for people and wildlife? And so that's what sort of got me interested in this whole topic. Is there anything that we could do to conserve wildlife on farms? A lot of my work has taken place actually in the tropics. I do a lot of work in Costa Rica. Here's a picture of one of the landscapes where I work in Northwest Costa Rica. And here are just some of the birds that I would regularly see on farms as we do our surveys in Costa Rica. And we've just seen that if you do things like, having patches of habitat of, in this case, tropical rainforest in or around your farm fields, you can get really remarkable species on your farms. And it's definitely not just the tropics. One of the studies that I always like to highlight when I'm talking is done in the Midwest in Iowa and led by Lisa Schulte-Moore, the so-called Prairie Strips Project, which is just this unbelievable program that has shown that having these small patches of prairie, of native prairie in the corn soy landscape along these field edges can do wonders for biodiversity, increasing flowering plant diversity for fold, huge numbers of pollinators and birds. And then the outcomes for farmers have been remarkable in terms of nutrient retention, sedimentation, a lot of really key outcomes, such that this program of adding prairie strips is now an NRCS practice and is just exploding all throughout the Midwest. But I didn't come here to talk to you guys about the tropics or about the Midwest. I came here to talk to you guys about our backyards in California and the Central Coast. And that's what I've been really interested in for the last few years, of asking, what are birds doing on these strawberry farms in the Central Coast? Are they providing us with benefits or costs, and how could we better manage them? And we know from speaking with farmers that birds do a lot of different things on these strawberry farms. Most apparent is that birds like to eat the berries just like we do, and so they might act as pests of strawberries, damaging them and eating them. Farmers are also very concerned about fecal contamination of strawberries and other fresh produce, both because people don't want to eat anything that's been contaminated with poop and because of all of the food safety issues, the proliferation of concern concerning Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter, and other diseases that birds might potentially host. But then we've also been talking about today about some benefits. So birds might be eating the bugs that eat the strawberries. For example, we've got a picture here of strawberries' primary insect pests, lygus insects. And then we could complicate the story even more. Birds might actually be also eating the bugs that eat the lygus. This is, in the scientific term, intraguild predation, or just the consumption of these beneficial insects like these big-eyed bugs. So birds might be doing all of these things. So what we set out to determine was, first, what is the net effect of birds on strawberry production? When you average all of those different actions together, are they net positive or net negative? And then second, and even more importantly, how does your actions on the farm affect that balance of costs and benefits associated with birds? Then finally, we were really interested in diving deeper into these food safety risk questions, just because that's something that's really on the mind of a lot of growers and sort of preventing them from thinking about conserving birds or their habitats in and around the farm. So what are the food safety risks of birds? And that's what I'm going to seek to talk to you guys about today. So the study system. We've been working across 20 different organic strawberry farms, and we specifically chose those farms in the Central Coast to vary both in the kind of amount of habitat surrounding the farm. So here you can see these red farms have little amounts of natural or semi-natural habitat in the areas around their farm. Versus these green ones have a lot. And so, you know, Dennis's Blue Heron Farm would be more in the green category over here. But then also the practices on the farm, whether there is diversification, like planting multiple crops, integrating hedgerows, all of those kinds of practices. So we chose those 20 farms to be able to look at those two things. And then one of the first things that we wanted to do was see who was doing what birds were doing what actions on the farm. So what did we do? Well, we would put up these mesh nets along the edges of the fields, and then birds would fly into them. Here you can see a bird that got trapped in this net, and we would take the bird out of that net, carefully extracting that, checking the net every couple, 20 minutes to make sure they don't stay in the net too long. And then we put them in these sterilized cloth bags and move them to this station where we could measure them and, look at them, figure out what they were. But they would leave us the present in these sterile cotton bags along the way. About 95% of them poop in these bags. And that was what we were interested in. We were really weighing into the bird poop for this project and taking it out of these bags, putting it into vials. And then what we could do is we could actually take the DNA sequences out of the poop to figure out what they were eating. We could build whole diet profiles, figuring out what insects they're eating, what plants they're eating, as well as what bacteria might be in that poop, in particular, the ones of food safety concern, so E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter. And so over the course of a lot of work across all those farms, we ended up capturing a bunch of birds and getting about 1,000 different fecal samples from 1,000 different birds of 50 different species, and then sequencing them all. Here are a picture of a couple of the birds that we were able to work with. And so we would get back this really remarkable data that would tell us the kind of feeding relationships of birds. So here is just a few of the species that we caught on farms that we know now are definitely consuming Lygus hesperis, which is, the primary insect pest of coffee, which is, or of strawberries, which is great. But on the other hand, we also found strawberries in all of these species poops as well. So we know that these birds are doing both things. And what's really important then is to figure out what the balance is. If they're eating both insects and strawberries, what does that mean in terms of their net effect for the farmer? To get at that, we need to do an experiment. And this is an exclusion experiment where we would build these cages and put them out around our strawberry plants, and the birds can't get in and feed now. And we would pair these cages with these open sort of controls where the birds would come in and be able to eat. We did this on 14 of our farms, and we would have 3 pairs of these cages and controls on different parts of the farm. And then we would monitor all of the berries in there for berry damage, and we would also look for the insects inside, do some insect surveys as well. So what was our takeaway from this study? Well, insects were far more of a problem than birds were in terms of direct damage. Somewhere around 30% of the berries had some degree of insect damage, whereas birds were far lower, like less than 5% of the berries were damaged. Surprisingly, though, when you integrate the benefits and costs of birds, we still found that the net effect of birds was slightly negative overall. So having birds caused, 3% loss in yield when you balance out the direct consumption of birds of the strawberries, the pest control benefits, as well as them eating the beneficial bugs. And this is likely due to the fact that birds do like to eat strawberries and that they will consume those beneficial insects, all right? But then the real question then starts to be then, okay, we know that at least for strawberries, birds are doing a little bit more harm than good, but how does different management practices shift that balance of benefits to costs? And one of the key things that we found was when we look at the diet of birds, when we look to see whether strawberries are present in that bird poop, here you can actually see some strawberry caked on the bill of this house finch right here, we found that birds were actually less likely to consume strawberries on the farms that had more habitat around them. And when we would do surveys looking for strawberries and bird damage, here you can see characteristic bird damage, these kind of triangular marks, as well as birds flicking the seeds on the plastic mulch. We saw significantly fewer signs of bird damage on farms with more habitat around them as well. So while birds might be sort of a net negative impact, if you had more habitat around the farm, they were less likely to be damaging your strawberries. What about the consumption of pests and beneficial insects? Here, we actually saw some surprising things as well. We actually saw that there were more pests and more beneficial insects in bird poop when we had farms that actually didn't have that much habitat around the farm field. And birds were less likely to eat pests and beneficial insects when you had more habitat around. Now that might be surprising, and why would that be? Well, there's a couple possibilities. One might be there are just relatively more pests and thus more beneficial insects following those pests when you have less habitat around the farm field. That's been shown for a variety of different types of systems around the world. So there might be more availability of these things for birds to eat. And sort of conversely, it might be that birds are tending to eat the other types of insects that exist in that surrounding habitat, that those are preferential for them when the habitat is around. All right. So now we know what they're eating, but now let's go back to the exclusion experiment and ask, all right, what we really care about is that balance of costs and benefits to look at the net impact on the strawberry yields, all right? So what happens for farms that are or are not surrounded by habitat with that? So here is an example farm, one of the farms we were working at, where we were able to model the cost impact of birds across the farm. And you can see that across the farm, the impact of birds, as we showed before, is sort of universally negative, but very slightly. It's a pretty slight negative impact. And this reflects that there are these birds like this spotted towhee that are sort of moving throughout the farm, eating occasional strawberries or eating occasional pests and beneficial insects, but as we learned from the previous slides, they're not doing that much of that on this farm in terms of eating the pests and beneficial insects, and so the effect is really slight. But what about the farms without any habitat surrounding them? Well, here you see a really interesting pattern. So at the field edges, you see really severe negative costs of birds. At the edges of the fields, you have these birds like these house finches coming in and eating a lot of strawberries, and you have other birds eating a lot of beneficial insects all along the edges. And then in the center of the fields, you get birds like this barn swallow here that are actually providing a lot of benefits. They're eating so many pests relative to all of these birds that are eating the crops that we actually see a net benefit. So the real question then becomes, let's pose some counterfactuals. Let's use our models and ask ourselves, all right, what if I was to take this farm and then add habitat all around it so that this farm looks more like this one? And then conversely, what if I was to take all this habitat around this farm and get rid of it? What would happen to this net impact? Well, this is what happens. We actually see a 25% decrease in costs if we were to increase the amount of habitat around this farm from 0% to about 50%. Conversely, if we were to take all this habitat out on this farm, we would say a 75% increase in costs. So when you balance out all of this complexity of the different birds eating the different things, you see with more habitat around the farm field, you actually see kind of less impact of the birds. And when you take that habitat away, you see a lot more impact of birds. And that brings us to this question about food safety risks, okay? What is going on with that? And would habitat around the farm or birds be a real big problem because they could be spreading these foodborne illnesses? The first thing to note is that songbird feces were very rarely directly sort of touching the strawberries, but they're also very common in general in the strawberry fields. We see a lot of bird poop in these farms, but only 2 of the more than 10,000 strawberries we looked at had bird feces that were directly touching the strawberry. That said, we know that irrigation water could spread that, pathogens around. So just because it wasn't touching the strawberry doesn't mean it wasn't a problem. So what about the density of these feces? Well, we didn't see any evidence that the feces were more common on farms that were more diversified or surrounded by habitat. There was no effect of the habitat around the farm on the density of feces. However, there were effects on the density when you had more fences and wires around. Birds like to perch on these fences and wires and poop there. And so if you had a lot of fences and wires around, there were a lot of poop next to it. Pretty unsurprising, but does mean you should be a little bit cautious about putting up these fences right next to risky produce. All right, but this isn't actually getting at the question of what's going on with the pathogens themselves, all right? So let's look at the pathogens. And to do this, we not only used our data set that we put together, but we also compiled a bunch of data from other studies all across the Western US. 11,000 tests of pathogenic E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter across 92 produce farms with 94 bird species arrayed all across the Western US. So this is the biggest data set with birds and foodborne illnesses and fresh produce that has ever existed. And so we can first look at just how common these pathogens are. And we find that both the STEC, the pathogenic E. coli, and the Salmonella are pretty dang rare. It's 0.2% and 0.5% of the birds that are testing positive for these guys, so very rare. Campylobacter, though, on the other hand, is much more common. About 8% of the birds were testing positive for Campylobacter. All right, so then what happens if we add habitat in or around our farm field? Are birds more likely or less likely to carry Campylobacter? And I won't show many graphs today, but here's one that I think is pretty compelling. And on the x-axis, we have the amount of the semi-natural habitat around the farm. So these ones have a lot of habitat around, and these ones don't. And on the y-axis, we have the probability that a bird is going to be carrying that Campylobacter, that pathogen. And you can see there's a negative relationship here. Farms that have more habitat around them are less likely to have birds that are carrying Campylobacter. And this sort of aligns with some of our prior work on E. coli prevalence rates in fresh produce that hasn't seen any evidence of having habitat around being a bad thing in terms of pathogenic E. coli in fresh produce. All right, so then let's ask, who are the players here? Which are the species that are carrying these foodborne pathogens? And we found that the species that tend to sometimes associate with livestock are the ones that we need to worry about. Those ones are more likely to carry pathogens, more likely to actually interact with the fresh produce, like come in contact with it, and then actually more likely to defecate it on it as well. So in this graph, I've got whether this species tends to associate with livestock, yes or no. On this graph, I show that here the probability of detecting Campylobacter is higher if they associate with livestock. And then we did bird surveys and found that the likelihood of a bird coming in contact with that fresh produce, actually coming in contact with it, was much higher when the species was one that associated with livestock. And then lastly, we would actually collect these pieces of poop and then sequence them to figure out who actually was the bird that pooped. And we found that the ones that were attributed, there were many, many more pieces of poop that were attributed back to these birds that were associated with livestock compared to the ones that aren't. In contrast, birds that eat insects, like these bluebirds and tree swallows that we keep talking about, were much less likely, significantly less likely to carry pathogens. So to sum up, as we kind of look at a farm like Blue Heron Farm that has all this habitat around it, our studies to date would suggest that this is a good thing. I know that Blue Heron, you guys don't make kind of grow too many strawberries, but it would decrease the strawberry damage from birds. It would mitigate that sort of net costs of birds on yields. It would not affect fecal contamination rates that we see, the kind of density of feces, and it would reduce the likelihood of birds carrying Campylobacter. Well, that's what we've found so far. So I'd like to thank the USDA, growers, landowners, field assistants, and all of you guys for listening, and I think we're taking questions at the end. So I will stop sharing my screen. Thank you all.
Great. Thank you so much, Danny. That was really, really great. And I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions at the end for you. But now I'm going to hand it over to Matt Johnson, and he's going to take it away from here.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. And thank you, Joanne, for organizing this. Thank you, Dennis, for opening up your farm virtually to us today. It was a privilege to hear from you and also to see some of the fantastic images of your farm. And thanks, Danny, for that great presentation. Yeah, like Danny, I'm a conservation biologist, wildlife biologist. I'm really interested in how we can integrate the needs of people and wildlife in the same spaces. So Danny and I share some research interests. We've both worked in the tropics. We've both actually worked on wildlife, especially birds, in coffee farms. So a quick plug, drink your shade coffee. Shade coffee farms are good for birds and good for farmers. And some people say it tastes better too. So yeah, it's nice to share that with Danny and to hear some of his latest research. That was really great. Currently, what I'm and my graduate students have been studying the last few years is barn owls that exist on agricultural areas in nest boxes that farmers put up for barn owls. And we've been working especially in wine grape vineyard systems and especially in Napa. But some of the patterns that we're finding, we think apply to other areas as well. So I'm going to share my screen and go over some of those results with you. There we go. Shelley, you got a thumbs up. Is it loud enough and you can see? Okay, great. So I'm up at Humboldt State University. That's where I am right now. It's a rainy day outside for us. I wish I was at Dennis's farm. But I'll have to make do with looking out my window here and seeing some of the birds that come by my apple tree. So as I mentioned, lots of farmers have been putting up barn owl boxes, and I'm sure many here in the audience have either done this or at least thought about it, as an attempt to help control rodent pests in farms. And this is actually practiced all over the world. In Israel, in Chile, in South Africa, and here in the United States, and certainly in California. And so it's the type of thing that's been around a long time, but there actually hasn't been too much scientific research to understand how it works, if it works, what farmers can do to try to make it more effective. And that's part of what my lab has been studying over the last 5 or 6 years now. And we have kind of 3 primary research questions that we've already asked, and I'll show you some results of those studies now, and then we have some additional questions that we're beginning to examine. And the first of those questions is how and where should the boxes be placed, right? You're clearly not going to get any sort of pest control from barn owls if there aren't barn owls in the boxes. That's step 1. They need to be occupied. So we've done an occupancy study in Napa Valley for going on 6 years now. And then the second question is, even if the even if there are barn owls in the boxes, if they're not hunting at least sometimes in the farm or in the vineyard, then it's unlikely that they're really going to be meaningfully contributing to pest control. So we wanted to ask that question: how much are the owls hunting in the vineyards? And for that, we used some GPS telemetry technology, which I'll also show you in a few minutes. And then third is how many rodents are they killing and removing from the landscape? And for that, we use some remote videography of the nest boxes. So in terms of our methods, as Dennis mentioned, a lot of the boxes are up high, so it's difficult sometimes to determine if there's owls in there or if they have chicks or whatever. And so what we do is we use a GoPro on the end of a stick. It's a little extendable painter pole. Here's a little video peeking inside a box, and there we see male and female barn owls. The females are usually a little larger and darker. She's got 3 eggs there so far. And their clutch size is usually 4 to 7 or 9. And so it's a very efficient system, very non-invasive. You can see some pictures there of my former graduate student, Carrie Went, with the extendable pole. And we do this during the day when the owls are typically sleeping. So with those data, then we can, we can figure out which variables are associated with nest boxes that are more likely to be occupied. And so what we have found is that barn owl boxes are more likely to be occupied if they're wooden as opposed to plastic. There's a lot of different manufacturers of barn owl boxes out there. Some people make their own, and we have found that the wooden ones are preferred over the plastic ones. I think there might be some questions in the chat. I'll be happy to get to those later on. And some of them I might get to as I'm continuing to describe the results. We've also found that nest boxes that are at least 10 feet or so off the ground are more likely to be occupied than nest boxes that are lower. In Napa, and we think this is the case for most of the Central Coast, they're more likely to be occupied if they're facing north or east. And that's likely because that helps them stay a little bit cooler than if they're facing south or west. By facing, I mean where the entrance hole is. And then very importantly, and this is related to some of the themes that Danny was talking about, the distribution and availability of semi-natural or uncultivated habitats nearby affects the birds that are in these farm landscapes. And so we found that barn owl boxes were much more likely to be occupied if there was some uncultivated habitat nearby. So this figure you see here on the left, each of these, at the center of each of these is a barn owl box. On the top, that's an occupied barn owl box. On the bottom, that's an unoccupied box. And those different colors depict different land cover types, purple being vineyard, and kind of that orangish color being grassland. And this is just an example of 2 boxes, but statistically, this is a pattern. The occupied boxes tended to have more natural habitats like grassland around them than the unoccupied boxes. And by natural habitats or uncultivated habitats, in this area at least, we're talking mainly about grasslands, oak savanna, mixed forest, and riparian habitats. So having some of those habitats nearby increases the chance that your barn owl box will be occupied. So that was the occupancy study. The next question is, how much are the owls hunting in the vineyards? And this was done by my former graduate student, Geronimo Castaneda. And for this study, we put GPS tags on the barn owls. They were like little backpacks with straps. And it would take a location of the bird during the night when they're hunting about every minute, and we could see where they were hunting. And then after several weeks, we would recapture the bird if we could, get the backpack off, and try to put it on another bird. So it gave us very detailed information about where the birds were hunting. And this is just one example. So again, this is a circle, the center at which would be the barn owl nest box. The different colors are depicting different land cover types. Purple again is vineyard, orangish again is grassland. And then these green dots are where this particular bird was hunting. So you can see it's hunting in the vineyards and then also in some of the nearby habitats. And what we found when we did this for lots of birds is what's depicted here with this pie chart. We found that on average, the birds are hunting about 1/3 of the time in the vineyard. But importantly, and that's very important right there, right? So that we know they are in fact hunting a large portion, a third of their time in the vineyard. But that's actually a little bit less than you might expect if they were just distributing randomly away from the barn owl nest box and hunting in whatever habitat is nearby, because most of the boxes have a lot of vineyard around them. But interestingly, you can see that the birds spent about 65% of their time hunting in these uncultivated habitats, these grasslands, oak savanna, mixed forest, and riparian, even though those habitats comprised only roughly 39% of the habitats available to them around their nest boxes. So they're choosing to spend a little bit extra time and hunting effort in these semi-natural habitats, and that's what's helping attract the owls to the farms to begin with. Yet the benefit to the farmers that they're still spending a third of their time hunting in those vineyards. So then the third question is, how many rodents do these barn owls actually remove? And to do this, this was done by former graduate student Dane St. George. And he put in, as I said, these remote infrared video cameras inside the nest box. So what you're seeing here on the left is an image at night. You're inside the nest box looking out. That's the end, that black circle is the entrance to the nest box. And so we ran these for the whole field season, and we could see the birds come back when they're delivering prey, like that adult owl is delivering a gopher to its young. And so we could, oops, have a little background noise, but maybe that'll stop when that video is over in just a moment. So then I can't remember, you know, it was something like 20,000 hours of video that we accumulated over the course of this study. And Dane employed a whole army of undergraduates to work through that. And he had a computer algorithm to try to weed out some of the downtime. There was a lot of time when you're just looking at a black hole. But eventually we did some calculations to estimate how many rodents the owls are eating over the course of a year, making some very conservative estimates about how many young they have, how many young survive, how long those young survive, and so on. And the estimate that we came up with is per family of barn owls over the course of a year, and an average barn owl family is between 3 and 4 chicks fledge. They are killing and removing close to 3,500 rodents every year, and that's every barn owl box that's occupied. This is also just assuming that the birds just nest just once in the year. We know some barn owls will nest twice in a year, so obviously this number could be even larger. So it's a very large number, especially for boxes, or so some farms that have 20 or more boxes, sometimes half or 3/4 of which are occupied. That's an enormous number of rodents being removed from the landscape. And again, based on their hunting, we're expecting at least a third of those to be removed from those vineyard habitats. Now, what they're eating varies a lot from region to region, even box to box. Barn owls are very opportunistic feeders. They will feed on what's available to them. But on average, in Napa, we're seeing something like this. About 50% of their diet is voles, 25% mice of several species, both house mice and native California mice, and then 15% gophers, and then 10% other things, a few birds, a few juvenile rabbits, occasional insects, but it's mostly these primary rodent pest species of voles, mice, and gophers. So here's just some imagery of, you know, who are the players here. It's really fun to observe and watch these owls grow over the course of the field season. Right now we're mid-February, so the birds are paired up. They're mostly laying eggs. In some cases, they may have some young chicks. Our field season is going to start in just 11 days or so, just right around the beginning of March. And we'll be monitoring the birds all through the spring and into the summer, all the way through July or so. And as I said, they have a clutch size between 3 to 4, 7. Occasionally we see a few higher than that. And barn owls are very interesting in that they have a unique behavioral strategy to be able to capitalize on a really dynamic system. As many of you probably know and have experienced, rodent populations are very dynamic, right? Some years there's lots of rodents, some years there's very few. Well, barn owls can't know that ahead of time. So what they do is they lay a large clutch, you know, as I said, 7 eggs, sometimes even a couple more. And then they begin to incubate those eggs as soon as they have laid them. And so what that means is it takes the female about 2 days to lay each egg. So she immediately starts incubating, and that means that the eggs will hatch asynchronously, meaning the very first laid egg will hatch first, and then the following, and then the following. So when you look at the chicks, like you can see here, you can see that this chick is considerably older than this chick. And likewise, in this image down here on the bottom, you can see a variety of ages. There's a young one here with a lot of fluff on its belly, and another one that, you know, looks much more similar to an adult. So you get this wide age range in the chicks. And that's an adaptation to, as I said, make use of a very unpredictable amount of food resources. So if it's a really good year for rodents, then the adults will probably be able to feed most or all of those chicks, and they'll fledge successfully. If it's a really bad year, they're not going to be able to bring all the rodents they need to fledge all those chicks. And so just a few, maybe 1 or 2 of those chicks will fledge, and the others will starve. And it sounds brutal, but again, that's a evolutionary strategy that the birds have evolved to make use of a very unpredictable food resource from year to year. So all of that work is suggestive that maybe these barn owl boxes and the barn owls that are attracted to them can really be useful, but we really haven't quite yet addressed squarely whether the barn owl boxes are helping farmers. So that's what some of our next questions are, and trying to understand what this means about relations between farmers and owls. So I've got a new team of graduate students, Samantha Chavez there on the upper left, Jamie Carlino, lower left, Ashley Hansen in the middle, and Laura Echavez on the far right. And these students are doing a series of studies, again in Napa, to try to ask these next questions. And these next questions include a controlled experiment where we are trapping rodents and counting the number of rodents on vineyards with barn owl boxes and without barn owl boxes. And we're going to be doing that this season, and we'll continue it, we hope, if we can continue to get funding, in future seasons after adding some barn owl boxes to the vineyard that currently doesn't have them, to see if we can really confirm or refute the hypothesis that the deployment of these barn owl nest boxes can actually reduce rodent abundance. The next question that we're also working on is to try to build a better spatial model that might help us predict where the barn owls are most likely to hunt and where they're most likely to occupy boxes. And if we build that spatial model, that would be a very powerful tool for farmers to use to be able to see perhaps gaps in the delivery of hunting pressure across the landscape and identify places where they might want to add additional boxes. And then third, we really want to verify that this is absolutely good for owls. In the ecology world, there's something called an ecological trap. And that's the idea that we don't want to be attracting animals to a place where they ultimately are not successful and able to replace themselves. We have a lot of anecdotal evidence to suggest that the barn owl boxes are good for barn owls based on that average fledging success of between 3 and 4 nests. But we need to more carefully measure the demographics of the entire barn owl population and really confirm that before we go all in on promoting additional use or putting up more and more nest boxes for these barn owls. So we're going to be carefully measuring that this year. But let me return briefly to this idea of the spatial model. Here's a very preliminary version of it. But what we do basically is we use our information about nest box occupancy and the hunting behavior of the owls and build a predictive map that shows predicted hunting pressure across the landscape as kind of a heat map. And from this, you can see in this little zoomed in area, you can see places that are darker red. That's where we predict there's a lot of hunting pressure, and places that are cooler colors of yellow or even blue where there's less hunting pressure. And so this could identify places where additional boxes could be useful to help deliver pest control. And then just in the last minute or two here, I'd like to kind of bring us back to, why we'd even be interested in thinking about integrating the needs of barn owls and farmers. In the scientific literature, a lot of conservation biologists use this phrase called ecosystem services, right? The idea that the ecosystem helps deliver services that are useful for people, whether it's pollination or carbon sequestration or plants taking in carbon dioxide and giving off oxygen. And that's all, of course, very important to understand and study and appreciate and recognize as a society. But, the language of the ecosystem service concept kind of reduces it to sort of a transactional relationship with nature. And I think that belies a little bit what I think is a more powerful way of thinking of that relationship. And so this idea I drew from this recent book published by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a member of the Potawatomi Nation and a plant ecologist at SUNY ESF in New York. She talks about ecosystem services, but talks about them differently. She talks about them as gifts from the earth. And I think this is a good way to think about it. Joanne mentioned the word reciprocity in some of her introduction. And those of you that are active farmers working with the land, that you have a relationship with the land, and the land has a relationship with you. And that's really, I think, the best way to think about it. We can do things that are good for the earth and good for the animals in these areas. And in many cases, those animals will contribute to an ecosystem that ultimately is helpful for us as a society, or helpful to an individual farmer as a farm manager or a landowner. And so that idea of a gift sort of changes our recognition of a relationship with the owls as we're just not engaging or employing the owls, deploying these boxes to achieve some product or some service. Instead, we're engaging in a relationship with the owls, doing something that we hope is good for them. And then they're also helping remove some rodents that can be good for us. So I think, that helps us remind ourselves that, these are beautiful birds. They're noble creatures, in my opinion. They each have their own individuality and their intrinsic value. And they also can have some instrumental value for us by removing rodents from the landscape. And this, I'll close with this quote. This kind of summarizes that concept from Aldo Leopold. He said, "When the land does well for its owner and the owner does well by their land, when both end up better by reason of their partnership, then we have conservation." So lots of people to thank, lots of farmers and farm managers that have allowed us to be on their property, and then various funders and undergraduate and graduate assistants over the years. And then there'll be time for questions, I think, a little later. So thank you very much for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Matt. That was really, really lovely. And that is also one of my favorite books. I love that, Braiding Sweetgrass. It's a really lovely book. And beautiful pictures too. So now Eric Brennan is gonna take it over and talk to us about sparrows. And I think Eric is also going to take a few questions after his presentation. He's gonna present for a little bit less time. And so if you have some questions, feel free to either just write them in the chat box and I can ask them at the end when it's time, or Eric can grab them out of there, either way. And then, yeah, we'll just do it that way. And at the end, you'll have a chance if you want to ask your question and raise your hand live, you can ask it at that point. Does that work for you, Eric?
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, hi, everybody. It's great to be able to present after some other bird enthusiasts. Let me just put it that way. So I really enjoyed both Matt and Danny's presentations. I should mention that the study that Danny mentioned in his study, the one where the landscape was relatively diversified, that was actually our research farm. So, that's so you're going to see another sort of another part of that in my presentation. So what I want to do today is I really want to tell you a little bit of a story. And this is a story about a few little birds that actually changed my life. You know, now when I say that, what do I exactly mean? Changed my life? Well, what I mean by that is that they made me think differently. They changed my perspective. They taught me some things, and they actually opened up a whole new area of research that I would have never even thought of doing. You know, unlike Matt and Danny, I have absolutely no educational background in ornithology or wildlife management or any of this. So, but that doesn't mean you can't do research. I mean, basically one learns to do research and then you apply it to different systems. So this was kind of a fun new segue for me. So let me kind of get into this a little bit here. Let me figure out how to get my slides to go forward. Hang on, there we go. Now, just want to mention that, you know, I do a lot of different types of research. If you want to learn more about some of my research, you can go to YouTube and just type in Brennan Organic, and there's a few different videos there. But what I'm really going to focus on today is what I call undercover work. Okay, so I'm an undercover government agent. I work under cover crops. I spend a lot of time on my butt and on my knees, bending down and looking under cover crops, sitting there for hours and hours and hours, and trying to untangle the complexity that's there and understand what's happening. Now, if you don't know, cover crops are crops that we don't harvest. They're things that we plow back in usually, and they provide all kinds of benefits from nutrient management to increasing the diversification in our systems. But what's really cool about cover crops is there's all kinds of neat things happening underneath there. So I grew up in the tropics in Papua New Guinea. And when I get under a cover crop, I sort of feel like a mini, like a little person again. And it's almost like I'm in a forest. You know, you can see things like, you know, these lady beetles down there. They're often pretty large numbers in looking for aphids to eat. And here's even a shot of a parasitoid wasp that's actually stinging an aphid, laying an egg inside of it. One thing I find when I'm in those cover crops is I'm glad I'm not an aphid because there's a lot of critters after you. But what I also find myself sometimes doing is being glad that I didn't sit on things or step on things in the cover crop. For example, this bunch of eggs from a duck that I almost stepped on once that just about gave me a heart attack when it flew out. And snakes and things like this. So there's unknowns under there, and then there's things that I'm sort of expecting. Now, today's story really focuses on bird droppings because that's what kind of got my attention. So I've been doing cover crop research in Salinas for about a year or so. This is back a picture from 2002. And I noticed under certain cover crops, there were more bird droppings. And I thought, why is that? Well, I kind of put that aside because we didn't really have a very good experiment to study this in, but then we started a long-term study, which is now in about its 18th year. And during 2 years of this study, I decided to look into this bird dropping issue. So this is our long-term study. And we've got different cover crops in our study. We've got mustard here. It's the same mustard species that you use for, you know, on your sandwiches, a legume rye mixture, and then rye. Okay, so those are grown in our long-term rotation. We also have some fallow or some plots that are frequently fallow, but they're grown during the winter time, and then we go into vegetables the other times of the year. Now you can read all the gory details about this in this paper if you want, that came out in Frontiers and Sustainable Food Systems. But what I want to do is just kind of give you a little bit of a taste of some of the data and not get too far into the weeds on this because there's a lot of details there, but I think there's some other stories behind it that may be just as interesting. So here's the stars of the show: white-crowned sparrow, the song sparrow, and the Savannah sparrow. I have to admit, when I started studying birds, I could barely differentiate these three birds. I mean, you know, now they look pretty different, but when one isn't paying attention to little birds, little brown birds like this, you just kind of think they're all the same. And, keep in mind, I grew up in the country of the bird of paradise. Birds in Papua New Guinea are colorful, incredibly colorful. It took me a while to appreciate the beauty of the birds in North America, but I now do. So these are the stars of the show. And essentially what I did was, when we were harvesting our cover crops, I would collect from the area where I was harvesting biomass of the cover crop for other purposes. I would collect bird droppings. Okay, just pick them up and count them, oven dry them and weigh them. So, and here's what I found. Very, very clear data. This is the average number of bird droppings per square meter under a legume rye mixture, mustard and rye. And there's about 10 times more droppings under mustard. Made me wonder why. What's going on under mustard? Well, to try to understand that, I take those droppings, use a high-tech method of putting them in water, dissolve the droppings, and then I really enjoy plant anatomy. So I stick them under my microscope and I look to see what is inside that dropping. And you can see all kinds of interesting things. There's a lot of plant tissue in some of them. And then there's also some insect tissue. So plant and insect tissue were the predominant tissues that we found. But we can use that information to try to understand which birds the droppings came from and then why they might be eating those things. So let me tell you just a little bit about the birds. It's quite hard to differentiate. I don't think actually we could not differentiate between droppings that came from a song sparrow or a savanna sparrow, because they both eat pretty similar things: arthropods, insects, spiders, whatever, and seeds. But what's cool is that the white-crowned sparrow also eat leaves. And this is cool because its droppings are pretty unique. It's also one of the reasons that it's one of the more challenging birds here, because it can eat some of our vegetables. So in a nutshell, what we found was that the white-crowned sparrow, the majority of those droppings in mustard came from the white-crowned sparrow, versus the droppings that were in rye and the legume rye were usually insect or seed-dominated droppings. Seldom did we find a vegetation-dominated dropping in rye or legume rye. And that begs the question, why? What is it about mustard that attracts the white-crowned sparrow? Well, here's the hypothesis that I wrote into this paper. The white-crowned sparrow is known to have a high need for sulfur amino acids for its feather production. And these are things like methionine. It's an essential amino acid for us as well. It's a precursor to glucosinolates, which is what gives mustards and broccolis their spicy flavor. But we think that the white-crowned sparrow is actually eating those to try to meet that need for the sulfur-rich amino acids. Now, one thing I should just mention real quickly is the white-crowned sparrow that I'm talking about is not here year-round. It's a complicated bird species. There are, I think, 4 or 5 subspecies. The one that we're dealing with here is Gamble's white-crowned sparrow, which is a long migrant. There's actually a paper that came out recently from some interesting folks that tracks the movement of these. They go like 3,500 miles all the way up to the Arctic. Anyway, you might want to check that one out, but there's also a nice write-up on some of the different sparrows in this area. But what I kind of want to spend just a little bit of time now talking about is how farmers can use this information and hopefully use it to make it so that the white-crowned sparrow is not a challenge. So when you look in this field here, this is a broccoli field right next to our organic research field is where this hedgerow begins. So everything this direction is the organic research field. This is my conventional neighbor. You can notice there's a lot of defoliation there. That was one year when my neighbor had terrible challenges with the white-crowned sparrow. And here's what I think the reason that happened was because that was the one year when he was growing broccoli, and I didn't have a fallow field, but I did not have mustard across the fence. So this is sort of a scenario here. So let's assume my neighbor's growing broccoli. I think one way we could potentially help to minimize the damage from the white-crowned sparrow is to make sure I've got a mustard cover crop across the hedgerow that may kind of act as a trap crop to keep it happy, keep it well fed. I think that would be far less likely to have damage in the broccoli here than if I had, say, a fallow field right next to it. Another idea would be maybe you don't need a full field of mustard. Maybe you could have just strips of mustard in other cover crops or some other crop that was not susceptible to damage by the white-crowned sparrow. So basically trying to draw the birds out of the hedgerow into this other field, maybe with a little bit less mustard. And then here's another thought also would be, if you're growing strawberries next to a field where there's potential for damage from the white-crowned sparrow due to this hedgerow or some kind of natural habitat nearby, rather than having the furrows of your strawberry fields bare, put mustard in the furrows. So this is a practice that I've been pushing a lot here because it reduces runoff and provides a lot of other benefits. But what's also cool is that the white-crowned sparrows can then use that habitat, that food source, and it might keep them out of your neighbor's fields. Anyway, that's kind of all I wanted to cover in terms of the content. So I think I got about 8 minutes or so here. If you have any questions or whatever, go for it.
All right. Well, I don't see, and if you have a question, just again, put it in the chat box on the bottom and I can ask that if you have any questions. But I don't see any in there at this moment.
No problem. Well, maybe while somebody's thinking whether or not they want to add one in there, let me show you one more interesting thing that I did not include actually in that time there. 2 days ago when I was out checking our strawberry fields, where we actually, by the way, we always do grow mustard in the furrows. I was really happy to see, and I've seen this a few times, weeds that grow right next to the strawberry plant are often specifically taken out by the white-crowned sparrow. So the white-crowned sparrow in this case is actually coming in and it's eating all the foliage, not of the strawberries, but of specific weeds that it likes to eat. And therefore we don't have to come in and pull that out. So that's a really good example of the mustard drawing the bird into that strawberry field to definitely provide us with a gift like Matt was mentioning, or an ecosystem service.
Okay, Eric, we have some questions.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the first is, does the mustard furrow crop, cover crop, bring more potential damage to strawberries?
No, that's the cool thing about the system is, so if we go back here to this, to look at that picture there, when we've got mustard in the strawberries are not actually producing fruit yet. So we actually come in, and right now we come in and we actually are starting to cut back the mustard, but the strawberries still will not be in production for another month or so. And so this issue of droppings from the white-crowned sparrow being an issue on the bed top and on those strawberries is not really a problem because it's a timing issue. The timing is kind of, we can manage the mustard, take it down when we need to keep the birds from being a problem when we're actually producing berries. So we've done this since 2011. And as far as we can tell, it doesn't increase bird damage on the berries at all. Great question.
Great. Here's another one. Are the sparrows particularly attracted to seedlings, or do they eat the foliage of the more mature mustard?
That's a good question that I don't completely know the answer to. I have seen with this mustard species, they definitely will eat it when it's small or when it's big. But I don't think that's quite the case with other brassicas like broccoli. They seem to be really bad when they're young, when the plants are really small. So it's still a bit of an open question, but I don't think it's as bad once the plants are bigger. And that's where, you know, trying to give them something else to keep them happy so that we can let the broccoli get big enough so it's not even affected by the birds could be helpful. But that's a good question to try to deal with in future research.
All right. And the next question, I think is just looking, this person is looking for clarifications. She wrote, weeds also add organic matter, deeper roots, and help fungi, etc. Correct, right?
Weeds definitely can add organic matter to the soil, you know, if they're producing a lot of biomass. I'm not afraid of weeds in our systems as long as those weeds are not producing seed. The reason we don't want seed production by the weeds, though, is because that increases our weeding costs. So when you're trying to grow, you know, lettuce or broccoli or whatever, hand weeding in an organic system is quite expensive. And so we want to be able to have as weed-free crops as we can, because otherwise those weeds can outcompete our crops and increase the weeding costs and make it far more challenging to produce. So I want vegetation in there, but I don't want vegetation that's challenging to manage.
Great. And I think we have time for a couple more questions. So if you don't want the mustard to spread, don't you need to prune flowers off of it before it seeds?
This mustard does not have the tendency to become a weed. And so it's different than some of the weedy mustards. This is, you know, it's a cultivated variety. It's not an issue. It generally, we cut it back anyway before, right around when it produces flowers or even prior to that if we need to. So this one, it does not have a tendency to become a weed. So you don't want to, it's not just any mustard. You want to be careful which mustards you plant. This was a white gold or Ida gold. Sinapis alba is the species.
Great. And let's see. So to what extent are sparrows berry or grape eaters? And what might be planted in a vineyard to discourage these guys from hanging around? And in terms of migratory birds in general, like dedicated insectivores such as bluebirds, birds that you do want hanging around in vineyards, can you extrapolate that the mustard and cover crops is supportive for the same chemical reason?
Let's save that question for the big Q&A at the end.
Okay.
The other experts can come in. I don't know the answer to that one.
Yeah, okay. Let's see if there's another one in here. I think those were all of the, because you answered the one, you know, someone asked if you had seen any increase in the lygus bug damage since mustard is an alternate host, but you had kind of covered that one. So I think that you got all the questions that were asked.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll get to that other one at the end.
Sounds good. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Eric. That was really great. And I love the story of how you discovered how to do that study by crawling around and in the cover crop. So thank you so much. So now I'm going to turn it over to Melanie Truen, and she's going to talk to us about nest boxes. You're on mute, Melanie.
Okay, I'll take care of that. Hello, everyone. Get my screen up here. Not sure which one it is. This one, I think. And do you have it yet?
It's not the full screen. Maybe just hit the share the screen or.
Oh, I thought I did. I thought I did. Let's see. Huh. I'm sharing. Hang on. Not sure what's happening here. So let me stop share and try it over again. Mm-hmm. Strange. Sorry, guys.
I'm happy to share too, and you can just tell me when to forward. I think I have your presentation.
Okay, let me try one more time here.
Melanie, I noticed at the bottom that it wasn't on slideshow mode. I think that might be the problem.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Huh. All right. Do you see it now?
Nope.
Wow, this is very strange. It worked fine before. Huh.
Do you want me to just pull it up?
Sure.
Okay. Perfect. All right.
All right. There we go. Glad that I sent it to you. It
Yeah.
was good to have a backup.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
we just get to the play. There you go.
Great. Thank you. All right. Well, this is wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to this event. Really enjoyed listening to all the other presenters. And I'm going to finish up by just sort of going through some practical information about nest boxes. For those of you that either have nest boxes, and these would be specifically for songbirds that I'll be talking about today, or if you decide you might like to try some nest boxes on your property to see if it might be a good option for you. As Shelley said, I am a staff research associate at UC Davis and with the Museum of Wildlife, Fish and Conservation Biology. And next slide, please. And in 2000, as a grad student, I started a project whereby we put up about 200 nest boxes along Puda Creek, which is our sort of stream that runs by campus here. Pretty degraded stream bordered by a lot of agricultural land uses, but the stream itself is kind of an interesting habitat. It's a little ribbon of riparian habitat in this agricultural matrix. And a lot of people were looking at the stream and wondering what kind of habitat values it might supply for wildlife. And that was where my research was involved, was wildlife habitat along this agricultural stream. And as part of this project, we were noticing that there weren't very many cavities, natural cavities in the riparian corridor. A lot of the old senescent trees and snags had been removed or had fallen down and weren't being replaced by other larger trees. So I just kind of thought, well, what would happen if we put some nest boxes up? What kind of results might there be? And so we put up about 200 nest boxes along about 9 different trails from upstream to downstream, about 20-mile run of creek. And just started learning about nest boxes, didn't know much about them, trial and error, bringing students, and we all have learned. And since 2000, these boxes are still in operation. We have an active internship program that helps us to maintain and monitor the boxes. And we've produced about 14,000 fledglings of 7 different species that all use the same box, which you can see here in the photograph. It's a standard North American bluebird style box, and 7 different species have nested. The 2 predominant species are tree swallow and western bluebird, and I'll talk more about those in detail. We also hang our boxes from trees, as you can see, and we use a kind of a telescoping pole lifter to bring them up and down out of the trees for monitoring and maintenance and that sort of thing. It keeps them safer up out of harm's way and helps keep the predation down on the boxes. So it's been a really nice method for this area, which has enough limbs to support them. In an open setting, you might need to do something different. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So next slide, please. And then in 2019, 2 years ago, we started noticing that the bluebirds, which had been coming back into the region in great numbers as a result of the Puda Creek work, were starting to come into our parks and green spaces in Davis. And so there was a movement to put some boxes up in some of our parks, green belts, and have the community be involved in monitoring and maintenance of these boxes. So as you can see, we have boxes both in trees where trees are present, and we've also put them up on poles in areas that are more open. Some of the poles, like the one in the lower right picture, are about a fixed pole, about 6 feet tall. And those are ideal for open spaces because the birds can fly in and out. Bluebirds and tree swallows like them quite a bit. And then on the upper right-hand side is a telescoping pole apparatus where we have 2 poles that slide in and up and down, one inside the other, that are attached with a pin in the open position. And that these boxes can go up to 9 or 10 feet high, which is nice for getting them up out of the way in actively air places where there's a lot of visitation, and it also helps prevent predators and that sort of thing as well. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of background, and again, I'm talking about songbird nest boxes. You've seen barn owl nest boxes, which are fabulous and a great tool in an agricultural setting. We're focusing on the songbird nest boxes, and this is a nest box at Blue Heron Farms. It's as you saw, mounted on a fence line, and these are some tree swallows that are visiting this box. So a nest box is a man-made enclosure provided for animals to nest in. Can be birds, it can also be bees or bats will nest in boxes. And as a caveat, most cavity nesting birds do prefer a natural cavity, which is generally excavated by a woodpecker or natural processes like limb breakage, that sort of thing. But with correct design, nest boxes can be a good replacement, especially in areas where natural cavities are lacking or few and far between. Next slide. So why are they important? Well, as I mentioned, loss of old trees and snags has reduced substrates for natural cavities. And there's a couple woodpeckers here that are responsible in large part for making these cavities. But the other part of the equation is invasive birds, non-native birds like the European house sparrow and the European starling have moved into North America, and they have found it quite to their liking. And they are both cavity nesters, and they often will take over what remaining natural cavities are available in an area. So, in the house sparrow, the European house sparrow is different, of course, than the 3 sparrows that we've been talking about today. Those are native sparrows. The house sparrow is a non-native species, and it is a cavity nester, and it is quite aggressive in taking over and usurping cavities from other birds, and actually can kill those other birds to drive them out. And the starlings, of course, also will take over, and then they have impacts on agricultural systems too, as we all know or can find out more about. So the thing about nest boxes is you can make the hole small enough to prevent starlings from getting in, which is a great boon. House sparrows, not so much. They're small enough to get in, but with careful monitoring, you can identify their nests before they lay eggs and control them at that point. The other good thing is that house sparrows are generally more abundant in urban areas or places where there are buildings. So in an open field or riparian habitats, we don't encounter them quite so much as we do, say, on the Davis Nest Box Network, which we have to be more careful. Next slide, please. So which birds use nest boxes? Well, this often depends on what area you're in and the type of habitat that is surrounding you. Of the 85 North American cavity nesters, about 36 will also use nest boxes, and that's from the East Coast to the West Coast. Of course, here in the West, we have our own suite of species, and in the coast, the suite of species might be slightly different than here in the Central Valley, where I'm located. Here in the Central Valley, some of the big ones are the tree swallow and the western bluebird, house wrens, white-breasted nuthatches, oak titmice, and ash-throated flycatcher, which is primarily a riparian species. You probably won't get that much in a farm setting. And so it's a variety of birds, and what you'd want to do is before you start your project is to research the birds that you might find in your area, and then design the boxes and the settings for those specific species that you might want to attract. Next slide, please. So just to kind of show you what you might see if some of these birds take up occupancy in your boxes, the tree swallow adult, and then the next column is what their nests and eggs look like. And then the third column is what the chicks look like when they're either close to fledging or post-fledging. So the tree swallows are very easy to identify. They have beautiful white eggs, and they often put feathers in the nest to line the nest and make it soft and comfortable for the chicks. And the bluebirds usually have beautiful blue eggs. Sometimes they're white, so don't let that throw you if you think you have bluebirds, but you have white eggs in. And so those would be those two. The next slide, please. So the house wren has a very interesting strategy. They fill every available cavity in their territory with coarse sticks, like in this photograph. And then the male will sing and invite females to join him in his territory, and she will decide which of the stick-filled cavities she wants to take up, and she will line it with finer grasses and twigs, and then lay her eggs. And the rest of the cavities that are filled with sticks are unavailable for other nesters. They've essentially removed the competition by filling boxes up with sticks. So that's one of the strategies. If you do have house wrens in your area and you want to make your boxes available to as many birds as possible, you would want to wait for a little while and see which cavity or box the house wrens took up, and then remove the sticks from the rest of them so that the other birds can also use them. So there's lots of little ins and outs of monitoring. At the end of my presentation, I will provide a bunch of resources and references to some of the really great online references online that you can go to find out all the ins and outs about nest boxing. And so there's plenty of information out there to help you. Next slide, please. So just the last two, ash-throated flycatcher, white-breasted nuthatch, just to show that a lot of birds put fur in their nests. They line their nests with fur, again, to make a soft, comfortable bed. There's also thought that maybe the fur helps deter predators because they smell the fur of, say, a skunk or some other species that's already been used in the nest, and then that will deter them. The jury's still out on that, whether it has any effect, but they certainly do it, and a lot of birds do. So it must have some sort of adaptive value. And plus, there's lots of fur around that they can find. So next slide, please. So one thing to consider is the right bird, the right box. We've been really lucky, as I mentioned, that 7 different species have used one type of box that we've used, that we're using. It's the North American bluebird style box with its distinctive dimensions and features. That's partly because I think that cavities are at such a premium that birds are really keen on using just about whatever they can find. But it also shows that they're adaptable. But if you wanted to, specialize in certain species, then you would want to make sure that the boxes that you put up had the right dimensions, the right configurations, the right hole size to accommodate and to meet the preferences of that particular species. And here are some online plans that you can explore to your heart's delight, because there are so many, and it's amazing how many different designs of boxes there are out there. But just to mention that this one seems to work quite well. So you can always go with the NABS style box. Here's a picture of a house wren starting to fill this little box with twigs, just to show you how industrious they are in doing that. Next slide, please. So just a few things that make a good nest box. Well constructed, of course, natural wood, thick walls, about 3/4 of an inch thick, provide good insulation, both during cold weather and warm weather. Entrance hole of the appropriate size. I mentioned that you could make it small enough to admit most songbirds, but not the starlings. And that would be 1 9/16 inches is what we use for our boxes. The entrance hole needs to be far enough from the floor that, say, scrub jays or other birds that might perch in the entrance can't reach down in and snatch chicks or eggs out. So if they're too close to the hole, sometimes predators or other birds can get their head in and pull things out. Of course, extended and sloped roof to keep the rain out. A recessed floor and drainage holes to keep the interior dry. That's something that's really important. You can see in this picture that the floor is recessed a bit up into the body of the box, so that the moisture coming down along the outside of the box won't wick back up into the bottom and make the nest area moist and colder and wet. So that's something easy to do, that you can help keep your box warm and cozy. Rough or grooved interior walls to help the fledglings get out when they're ready. We find you don't really need to put the grooves in, that just a rough surface on the inside of that front wall is enough. Ventilation holes up in the top or open areas like a slit or slots where you can get ventilation from through the top and the bottom. It helps a lot in our hot California summers. Front or side panel opening, either one is fine, whatever you like. Just something that you can open up completely and scoop out the nest material that collects in the bottom of the box. And then no outside perches for these boxes, because you don't want to create places for predators or other birds to sit. All the cavity nesters don't need a perch on their box. They just fly right to the hole and go in. Next slide, please. So there's a lot to think about where and how to place a nest box. These are some pictures of some different predator guards and things that you can put on, or sun baffles, and all of that is online. You can read about it. I just put it in here to kind of show you what the options could be. You can mount boxes on poles or fences, or hang them from tree limbs. Generally, hanging or pole mounted boxes are safest. Sometimes on the fences, the predators can get in a little better. One thing I didn't write here, but I want to mention is that the boxes should be spaced at least 200 feet apart if you want them to be available to the same species, because you want to be able to accommodate the territorial distances of a bluebird. For example, if you were going for all bluebirds, you'd want to put all your boxes at least 200 feet apart. If you want to have other species, you can pair the boxes more closely together. So you might, if you put them 15 to 25 feet apart, you could get a bluebird and a tree swallow, for example, nesting together. So something to think about in maximizing your space. Direction is same with the barn owls. They like it facing east or north, the hole, so it gets the morning sun and it kind of helps cut down on the heat gain in the afternoons. You can put heat shields up if their boxes are out in the open and tend to get too hot. Great for organic farms because it's better to not have boxes in places where herbicides or pesticides are used, both because it depletes their insect prey, but also because it can have impacts on the birds themselves. Next slide. And when to set up your nest boxes. I get this question a lot. People come up to me and say, "Oh, it's March. I want to put boxes out for birds." And I say, "Yeah, it's kind of late because they've already been prospecting all winter. Now they pretty much know where they want to put their nests. Better if you do it in the fall, which gives the birds the whole winter time to prospect and to look for those locations. And even given that, though, it's good to not be discouraged if the birds don't take up occupancy right away, because sometimes it does take a year, 2 years before birds will feel comfortable enough with this new feature in their environment to start using it. Next slide. So, and then the most important part, I think, of nest boxing is monitoring, because you want to make sure that these boxes are functioning in the way that you have planned for them to function, and that they're providing a service for birds and then a service for you in your farm or your home or your wild area, whatever it is that you're trying to bring birds to. It's a lot of work, and that's one of the reasons why we have an active internship program where the students can help us monitor our 300 plus boxes throughout this breeding season. Every 7 to 10 days, they go out and check on the boxes. You want to, early in the season, you want to make sure you don't go too often, or that you don't open a box if it looks like birds are newly sort of prospecting on that box. If they, there isn't a nest in there and it's early on and they're kind of checking it out, but they're kind of nervous, you just stand back and just wait and come back later if it looks as if they've taken up occupancy, because it will put them off and they may never come back if they're deterred too early. Once the birds have settled in, you can open the boxes to check on the contents. You might want to tap the box lightly before you open it to give any incubating adults the opportunity to fly out. Sometimes they still don't fly out. Sometimes they'll just be sitting there when you open up the box, which is kind of fun and exciting. And we just sort of peek in and say, oh, hi, and then close it and put it back and come back another time. Try not to spend too much time with the box, either down off its limb or open. A minute is about right. Count the eggs and chicks if you can, and look for any signs of problems. Of course, you'll also see if there's been any predation or any problems that might have occurred since your last visit. Be able to recognize and remove house sparrow and or starling nests when you open your box. That's really important. So look at pictures online or elsewhere so that you can tell, because you want to remove those house sparrow nests as soon as possible before they lay eggs, and certainly before the chicks hatch. Because after the chicks hatch, then you have to actually euthanize the chicks based on regulations. And so it's better just to try to not even go there at that point. Catch them soon. And sometimes with house sparrows, you have to keep evicting them because the males are very tenacious, and they'll just keep building nests. So it usually takes 2 or 3 times sometimes to finally get them to give up. Clean out the boxes at the end of the season. And then the last thing is that woodpeckers will often enlarge entrance holes, especially during the winter, so that they can get in there and have a nice cozy place to spend the winter. So when that happens, the hole will be big enough to allow starlings in. And that's another reason to monitor your boxes so that you keep those hole sizes small. If it does get enlarged, you can put a metal plate on the front, similar to what we've done here in this box. Just screw it right on the front and that'll bring that size back down again. It also helps deter any future excavations. Next slide, please. And that's my last slide. These are 3 great organizations. The California Bluebird Recovery Program I've been involved in since 2000. It's a local program with great volunteers. There's actually some of the members are on this call today, on this field, the virtual, and they have lots and lots of great information and are very helpful. North American Bluebird Society likewise has tons of information, nest box plans, monitoring plans, data sheets, you name it. And then the Cornell Nest Watch is a great program that actually takes data, as does the California Bluebird Recovery Program, by the way. It's a great organization to send your nest box data too. Both of these, Cornell and CBRP, will accept data on number of eggs produced, chicks, fledgling species, and it all goes into these citizen science databases that then everyone can access, and that are also used for research and more providing information for other projects and research projects too. So definitely hit those up, and I'm here for questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. That was really great. I think this is the time, if we were in person, we would all do a round of applause for our speakers. So thank you so much for listening and hanging out. And I just have a couple more. I'm going to, I think I need to, let's see, share my screen one more time.
Ellie, can we ask a few more questions?
Yeah, I was going to just mention really quickly, I know we're
Okay.
behind time, so I'm just going to mention that. Here we go. Yeah, so in the email, reminder email that I sent to you all yesterday, you should have received, there was a link to download a resource page, which has some of the resources that were mentioned today. And if you didn't get that link for some reason, you can access it at that link at the top of the screen. On there, there are several resources, including this Beneficial Bird book put out by Wild Farm Alliance. You can download that for free from our website. You can also purchase a hard copy if you prefer that or would like that. And you can get that from our website. And I'm not going to go over these really very much, but we have an online component to our supporting beneficial birds and managing pest birds guidebook. It's our multimedia story platform. It's really colorful and beautiful, and it has lots of stories and videos like the one that we showed you of Dennis and Blue Heron Farms this morning. Has more of those stories on there for you to watch. The latest tab on there is about our Songbird Farm Trail. And this is a newer project that we have, and it's where we are encouraging and inspiring 1 million nest boxes from Baja to BC, up and down the Pacific Coast states. And our goal is to get 5% of the 22 million acres of cropland, which is the yellow area on this map, to install a nest box. And that would get us to our goal of 1 million boxes. So we're mapping those farms on that trail. So if you have a farm and you have a nest box on there, we would love to add you there. And or if you are going to get a nest box, please think about adding your farm to the trail. And the last but not least, before we get to the Q&A, we have 2 additional field days coming up. One will be at in March 10th at Medlock Ames Vineyard in Healdsburg. And then the next one is at Davis Ranches, which is in Colusa. And this is our contact information, but I'm going to hand it over now to Joanne, and she's going to run the Q&A session. And then don't forget, we will have a evaluation, a quick poll. It's just 10 questions at the end. And if you fill it out, you'll be able to get into the drawing for the Patagonia duffel bag.
All right. Thank you, Shelley. Well, there's been some comments or just praises of how gorgeous Blue Heron is and how lovely the flowers are, and it appears that you have great folks working with you, Dennis. There's also, early on, there was a question about should you put up supplemental feeders if the pest insects are in low numbers at the growing season, beginning as insurance to have their presence, meaning the birds' presence later in the season I don't know, does anybody want to take that question about supplemental feeders?
Well, we don't do anything like that, but we're not trying to attract birds to areas that are necessarily depauperate in. Lots and lots of pest insects or insect prey in the areas always. So I don't really have much more than that.
I don't know if there's actually any data on the impacts of that practice. I know that's something people were trying out a little bit with the strawberries as a kind of like a trap crop, like Eric was talking about, of trying to get the birds off of the strawberries by putting seed along the side of it. I think, you know, there's some rationale why that could work, or it could backfire spectacularly with you bringing more birds into your farm that are nice seed-eating birds that would also eat your strawberries and other things. So yeah, without any studies out there, I would be wary, or trial it out and see how it affects you.
We've also noticed in some of our studies that if there are pest outbreaks, that the birds will often find the pests on their own, and you get the birds that will eat those pests, basically. You know, so rather than attracting birds that may or may not eat the pests that you have or will have on your farm, it's seemingly better to let the signal of the pest outbreak call in the birds that you might need to control them.
Yeah, thank you. There was a question or a comment about how a person has a lot of different sparrows, not sure exactly what species. What would you recommend they do if they were learning about sparrows?
Get a Sibley guide and or take an ornithology workshop, or you can join your local Audubon organization, society, and go out with other birders who are really, really adept at identifying those species. That's a really great way to learn and a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's great. Let's see. People love the barn owl pictures. I think this question got answered. How important is the structure and species richness of surrounding habitats for positive impacts on beneficial birds? But Matt, did you get a chance to answer that, or do you want to speak to that?
Well, that might have relevance to Danny's thing too, but for the barn owls, yeah, the higher the amount of natural habitat within a kilometer or a kilometer and a half of the nest box, the higher the probability that that nest box will be occupied. So those natural habitats are certainly helping attract birds to the area.
Yeah, and in terms of the composition of that habitat, there's like increasingly depth that you could go into of what matters. And the problem is that when you want to drill down and ask, all right, what kinds of habitat would be best, or what plants or things like that, that just means your sample size needs to go up and up and up and up. So we have relatively coarse measures of just asking, all right, if there's any habitat around, how does that affect things? And we show that like just the simple amount like does matter a lot. But I'm sure the more studies you could do with the bigger sample sizes you can get, then you can begin to drill into some of those compositional questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're really interested in learning more about that too. Just that we talked to growers about putting in native habitat, but what exactly is the best? So there's another question. If prevailing wind is from the north, would it still be okay to have the box facing north? And that might have been for you, Matt.
Yeah, I think I answered that one in the chat. I'd try facing it to the east to sort of balance wind and sun.
Right.
But try, and if it doesn't work for a while, move it.
Good. Then you answered a couple other questions. For Melanie, starlings took over barn owl box last year. Can this be prevented?
A barn owl box.
Oh, sorry. I guess that's for Matt.
Ooh, starlings in the barn owl box, huh? Yeah, we haven't seen too much of that in Napa. No, that's not going to be easy to avoid. Again, you might, if you've never had a barn owl in that box and it's been up for a while, I would try moving it to a different spot. Because if it's really attractive to the barn owls, the starlings aren't going to stop the barn owls. In fact, they might appreciate the extra protein.
Let's see. If an area has a known raptor perch, are there special management practices for installing songbird boxes? So that's a question for you, Melanie.
Well, the majority of the raptor perches are typically occupied by the buteo hawks, the bigger rodent-eating hawks. So the red-tailed hawk, the Swainson's hawk, typically focus on rodents, or in the case of the Swainson's hawk, insects, large insects. So it's actually a great species to bring to your fields, by the way, because they eat a lot of the grasshoppers and insects that will attack the crops. The songbird, the hawks that attack songbirds or use them as prey are typically the accipiter hawks, like the Cooper's hawk or the sharp-shinned hawk. And those typically won't sit on raptor perches. So I don't think you would have, we haven't seen any deleterious effects of having raptor perches nearby songbird boxes. So I think they're different in their life history strategies.
There's a comment about sparrows eating big old broccoli leaves. And I wanted to share with you that, you know, as Shelley mentioned, we are creating these short videos, and you saw one this morning. One of the videos we're in the process of creating is with a grower who has created little short perches. What he's done is he's screwed off the sprinkler head off of his pipe sections that are 30 feet long and screwed on a little perch. And he did that because he saw a Cooper's hawk coming in and eating a lot of his larger brassica plants leaves and also some other crops, and eating seedlings. And he says since he's put those perches up, he's seen the Cooper's hawk using it, and the sparrow damage has gone down to a very low amount. So that was pretty creative. Yeah, so I think we may have covered, are there other questions? Sorry. Let's see, here's a comment. We use kites looking like falcons and work pretty well preventing damage from wood pigeons or starlings. This is in northern Spain. And I wonder if the kites eventually, I mean, the kites that look like falcons, you know, the birds sometimes get used to something and then they don't work. Maybe they move those kites around. Let's see. For Daniel, what are some of the species associated with livestock that tested high for Campylobacter?
Yeah, so for Campylobacter, there are a few key players here, and sort of from the nice win-win conservation story, these happen to be a lot of the bad actors that Melanie was talking about earlier. So thinking about evicting those from your nest box is a really good idea. House sparrows, starlings, actually another invasive species that's increasingly common around here is the European collared dove. A lot of those guys are associated with livestock and had relatively high rates of Campylobacter. A couple other ones that popped up there with Campylobacter would be a brown-headed cowbird, and then also Canada geese too had relatively high rates of Campylobacter, and are found in these livestock operations sometimes.
That's really interesting. And Do you think that's where they're picking it up, from the livestock operations, or do they also sometimes go to maybe degraded wetland areas that yeah.
Yeah, totally. There's been a lot of work looking at like birds using refuse sites, wastewater treatment plants, things like that, and getting it that way. A lot of all of our focus was basically of birds surveyed on produce farms. So we weren't specifically sort of targeting those areas, but instead asking if that species in general uses livestock operations, would we expect to see higher rates of these pathogens with birds caught on farm fields? So yeah, who knows where they got it from?
Yeah. This person also who mentioned kites had said the problem with using kites is that they also scare helpful birds. And I know one of our other researcher collaborators has suggested that if you usually don't need to scare birds year round, you need to just scare them when the crop is ready to harvest. And so that's when you want to use the kites or any other kind of methods that discourage birds, but encourage them other times of the year. Because even those birds like blackbirds that might eat the crop, they also are feeding insects to their young. Let's see. I don't think I'm really great at this job, because there's this question here. Someone said, I asked Melanie about the swallow box shapes. It's up above. Do y'all see that?
I have it. I can read it out.
Okay, thank you.
So can Melanie discuss the shape of the holes for swallows? I have done round, diamond, and smaller slits with some success, but is there a best one given house sparrows and still a best one given house sparrows and still appetizing to swallows and others?
Well, I assume from that you might be having trouble with house sparrows in your boxes. If that's the case, then I don't think the shape will matter at all, and you just have to keep monitoring them. The shape I have found also doesn't seem to matter too much to tree swallows either. If you observe the types of natural cavities that tree swallows will go for, they are any size. They're generally whatever size hole is left in the tree. But what they do like is this is natural cavities now, so you could try to mimic this in your boxes. With what they do like with respect to natural cavities is to have the cavity on the underside of the limb and sort of facing down or diagonally down toward the ground. They'll swoop up into the hole and just go right in. And it's because they're so aerially adept, they're able to get into some of these holes that other birds might have a harder time doing. So what we found is that we could really maximize boxes for tree swallows by hanging them on the limbs instead of mounting them on a trunk or a pole. And we could sort of try to mimic that same sort of sense of the bird coming up from below and flying up into the hole directly. And our tree swallow populations in our boxes increased tenfold when we did that. So that at least would make it better and more attractive for your tree swallows. And hopefully, I don't know about house sparrows. They tend to like a lower box and one that's a little bit more on a trunk or a pole. So anyway, I would try that. Try hanging them. It doesn't matter what the opening is as far as tree swallows are concerned. So if you can do that, or if you can mount them underneath an eave, that might be, although house sparrows will like that too. So I don't know. It's hard with house sparrows. They just are really persistent.
Yeah. I may have covered all of the questions. Do you all see any that you want to address that I missed?
There's another one for Matt about barn owl boxes. And asking how many boxes per acre of vineyard do you recommend? How far apart should the boxes be?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, we recommend 1 per 5 acres. You know, if you're a large landowner and that's too many for you to tackle at once, any's better than none. And in terms of their proximity, they're really not very territorial, really not territorial at all that we can tell. So there's not an issue of them being too close together. I have even heard stories in Israel of 2 boxes on the same pole, both occupied by full families of barn owls, no problem. But I wouldn't recommend that. So, you know, I'd say, you know, 50 yards away or so is fine. And you know, and if your habitat is just incredible for barn owls, like we have found in some parts of southern Napa Valley, and all your boxes get occupied, then, you know, add more. So it could even be higher than 5 boxes, or a box per every 5 acres. But that's a good place to try to start or get to over time.
Hey, Matt, I have a question for you. So over time, do you think that the rodent population goes down because of barn owls, and then the barn owls maybe don't use as many boxes because it's a success story?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, you know, as we saw from the hunting data, they're still using, at least in the heterogeneous landscape we're studying, they're still spending 60 or so % of their time hunting in the uncultivated habitats, which is probably providing a pretty reliable year after year source of rodents. But yeah, the kind of long-term or sort of landscape effects of, you know, what if you attract hundreds of owls to a landscape? You know, does that have a more regional effect on the population of rodents? And could that ultimately come back to affect the owls? We don't know the answer to any of those questions yet. But I think, especially in the heterogeneous habitats, there's going to be some stability offered by that heterogeneity.
That makes sense. Here's a question for both Matt and Melanie. Do you prefer unpainted boxes?
Do we prefer, or
do the birds, sorry, do the birds prefer unpainted boxes?
They seem to, yes. I think they mimic more the natural trees that birds would be nesting in. Sometimes we do paint the roofs of our boxes, or we put on the white painted baffles around the boxes if they're out in the sun and it looks as if heat is going to be an issue. We typically will put them up unpainted, and usually you want to use a wood like cedar or redwood, some wood that has good insulating properties but that will also breathe. And I think that might be another drawback of painting the boxes, is that they might not breathe as well in the summer, in the heat. So we kind of do what we have to do. We start with unpainted boxes. If it looks as if there's mortality due to heat, then we can start thinking about ways of ameliorating that. We also put our boxes in the shade whenever possible, either, afternoon shade. So figure out where the afternoon shade is going to be and then put the box there if possible. Actually, interestingly, Danny and I and our group are looking at and going to be looking at temperature effects in boxes and how that influences reproductive success in cavity nesting birds. So that's a very timely question.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I look forward to learning more from you about that, and sharing with everybody. So here's another question. If there's a great horned owl on the property, will barn owls occupy boxes?
If the great horned is very frequent on the property, they probably won't. So yeah, if you're in an area, a fairly wooded area, or that you see or hear the great horned very often right on the farm, then you can always try, but it's a good chance they won't occupy that box. But in the northern part of Napa Valley, where there's a lot of a little bit more forested landscape, we do hear and see great horns in the forest. And then in the more pure open area where the vineyards are, there are still occupied boxes. So it kind of depends on how often and frequently that great horned is on your farm property itself.
think we might have reached the end of the questions. Unless there's anything you all want to add, the speakers want to add, we can wrap up